So today I'm going to be ranking all 35 episodes of what is without a doubt the most popular season of That's So Raven. Now I don't want to hold things up too much, so let's just dive in and rank all of the episodes in the record-breaking third season of That's So Raven.
Yep, that's me.
People want a happy face. Those are better days. Yeah.
Is your favorite Better Days cast?
Oh, hey. Yeah, I like that song.
Yeah, we liked it too until you sang it.
In this episode, Corey wins a contest and gets a minor role in his favorite TV show. So the whole family travels to Hollywood with Corey and they watch him do his thing. Now the reason this episode is all the way on the bottom is because this was not an episode of That's So Raven at all. It started off that way, then halfway through it became a completely different show about a 12-year-old TV star played by Allison Stoner who is adjusting to life now that she's going back to regular school. And although I love Allison and I think she's an incredibly talented dancer, this episode was just not it. Also, I learned that the plot of the second half of this episode was later reworked into a little show called Hannah Montana.
Come on, baby. Ah! Are you okay?
Just a little internal bleeding.
I'm really sorry, Frank.
It is pronounced Frank.
Honk.
In this episode, Raven's father gives her $100 to buy a new calculator for her math class, but Raven instead uses the money to purchase a blouse, which she plans on returning after wearing it to a big party. Unfortunately, chaos ensues when Raven damages the blouse. Now this episode frustrates me because all of this could have been avoided had Raven just used the money for what it was meant for, but I will say we did get a pretty hilarious episode out of her mistake.
You get to clean then, isn't that right, Miss Sweetface?
In this episode, the community has gathered to put on their annual play at the community theater. Unfortunately, Raven has a vision that the audience will hate the play, so she goes full control freak, trying to fix everything wrong with the play. This ends up making everybody else want to quit the play, forcing Raven to do everything by herself. Now, I don't believe that the show has a dull or boring episode or even a dull or boring moment, but this episode is the closest to it in my opinion.
You two-timing cheater! I stood by you when you had a tagging problem, a gambling problem. You're gonna cheat on me with some hussy? Get a bad weave, girl. You toxic boy. Oh, snap! She ain't even real.
In this episode, Raven has been seeing this new guy, then she has a vision that she's gonna break up with him for something. So Raven keeps trying to find things wrong with her boyfriend, only to realize that he's Mr. Perfect. Now this episode does have its funny moments because, duh, it's That's So Raven. However, this episode was just pretty forgettable in my opinion, and it comes at the tail end of season 3, and usually shows have their stronger episodes towards the beginning of a season, and their weaker episodes towards the end, and Mr. Perfect is no exception.
And nothing says party more than guacamole.
No, you did not just guac me.
Yeah, I did, but I see you're upset, Mr. Jones, and I would be too. If I didn't have this. Corey's amazing stain remover.
Yeah, well, something's gonna get removed, all right? Hey!
In this episode, a successful businessman, played by James Avery, rest in peace, comes to town and everyone in the Baxter household, minus Tanya, tries to come up with a product for the businessman to take and make mad money for them. Now this episode was okay in my opinion, just not one of my personal favorites. Although having Sierra and Stanley pretty much linger throughout this episode does make it stand out from the other 34 episodes in this season.
Oh! I'll get back to you with my result.
You better get back to me with my $250.
All right. Your mother's gonna love her birthday present, Mad Dog. Hey, you look like a girl. Not you, the t-shirt. See, something went wrong.
In this episode, Senorita Rodriguez has Raven, Eddie, and Chelsea compete against a different team, then eventually against each other, to see who can come up with the most popular business at the school. Now, it's episodes like this that make me say that this show, but especially season 3 of this show, felt like a cartoon. Because there was this scene where there was a huge pile of popcorn in the hallway, and it was so over the top. And a lot of the times, the over the topness of That's So Raven works extremely well, but other times it just gives me a headache.
Well, is anybody looking for little old me? Eddie, this is seance. Please make your acquaintance.
In this episode, Eddie and Chantel break up, so now Eddie doesn't have a date to his basketball team's award ceremony. But worry not. Here comes Raven to save the day with her Southern Belle disguise. About this episode, the good news is this is one of Raven's most convincing disguises, because there are some disguises where I'm just like, you're not fooling anyone, girl. We know that's you dressed as the lunch lady. But the bad news about this episode is that for whatever reason, I just don't gravitate towards it all that much.
Ray, hurry up with that backpack!
I'm working on it!
Sorry, Kenny, you know good help is so hard to find these days, brother. They can't all be Chantels.
Heads up!
In this episode, Raven, Eddie, Chelsea, and Chantel work at the school store, and Eddie is left in charge but abuses his power by making Raven and Chelsea do all the work while his girlfriend Chantel does nothing. Now I feel bad for whoever the custodians were on this set because they always had to clean up such big messes. They had to clean up that huge pile of popcorn I've mentioned before, but in this episode they have to clean up a whole bunch of ice cream that spilled all over the floor. Overall, this episode was another episode that I thought was pretty funny, but just not one that I personally gravitate towards.
Okay, it's a skirt. But the only reason I'm wearing it is because of you.
Oh, hold up. What's a little dude in a skirt got to do with pressure?
My big sister scammed me into taking dance lessons so she can meet you.
Like Corey says, this episode is about how Raven tricked Corey into taking dance classes at a local dancing center so that Raven could meet a pop star named Pressure, which is an obvious nod to Usher. Now this episode broke Disney records by being the 66th episode of any Disney show, because back then it was just 65 and then you're done for. But for an episode that broke records, this episode was just alright. However, I will say I did enjoy Pressure's music video where he was getting back at his ex-girlfriend for breaking up with him.
You are? Well, yeah, I mean, all Chelsea talks about at Veggie Camp is Raven. Raven, Raven, Raven. You do? Oh, yeah. I mean, come on. I gotta tell my camp best friend about my home best friend. I love both of you guys. It's really hard for me to see you fighting like this.
In this episode, Chelsea's friend from vegetarian camp comes to visit, then her and Raven start competing for Chelsea's friendship. Now, I automatically love any episode that centers around Chelsea because I think she's an amazing character. Also, I thought it was pretty funny how this episode had that one plant that was like a Venus flytrap on steroids. But overall, this episode was just a nice episode.
We got some news for you.
Yeah, Mr. B, there's a new restaurant opening up right next door.
No problem. Heard about it. The Choco can handle a little competition. Hello, Victor. Leonard Stevenson.
In this episode, Victor's arch rival, Leonard Stevenson, opens up a competing restaurant down the block. Raven then has a vision that Leonard's restaurant will put her father's Chill Grill out of business, and she tries everything she can do to stop it from happening. Now, this is actually one of the 2 episodes of the show that I purchased on iTunes back in like 2015, and maybe this episode deserves to be in a higher position, but because I bought it and I watched it like over and over again, I have no choice but to put it in the bottom tier, although it is like on the top of the bottom tier.
Natasha?
Eric, we were looking for the little girl's room. In Russia, we call it the Eddy.
Okay, now we've officially entered the middle tier. In this episode, Raven has a crush on a guy who is very into fitness. And when he mistakes Raven for an excellent gymnast student from Russia, who looks exactly like her, Raven runs with it just like any of us would. Now this episode was entertaining, but I kinda wish the Russian girl, Natasha, had more of a role in this episode. She could have been friends with Raven and them, and explained her culture and stuff. Maybe even teach them a few gymnastic moves herself, cause she was very talented.
Mom, are you okay?
No. I specifically asked you to give the professor the envelope on the counter.
What did I do?
You gave him the envelope that was on the desk.
I'm guessing there's a difference.
In this episode, Tanya and Raven must retrieve Tanya's angry letter that was never meant to be read from Tanya's law professor's jacket, which he dropped off at the cleaners. Now, I know this episode made the dry cleaner lady out to be the enemy, but I really felt for her. Raven put her through a lot in this episode, but she of course put Raven through a lot as well. Also, the dry cleaner lady was played by Macy Gray, who's got an excellent raspy singing voice, and I thought it was awesome that they got her in an episode of this show.
Say goodnight, Baxter.
Night, Baxter.
In this episode, Raven quite literally knocks the bad out of the bad girl at school during a game of dodgeball. Now, in my opinion, Bianca was a weak mean girl to begin with, especially when compared to the previous mean girl, Alana, who was a way more fleshed out character. Alana was more intimidating, and I thought it was funny whenever she got mad and started yelling at people in Spanish. But yeah, if Alana was here in this episode and Raven knocked the bad out of her instead of Bianca, then I would have put this episode a lot higher.
What are you doing up there? Well, not that you care, but this is my protest ray, okay? Jake and I are gonna stay up in this tree until they promise not to cut down old Oaky.
Jake? Charles, Jake is on his way to the nurse.
Yeah, Ray, that's all part of the plan, okay? The nurse is gonna send him home, and then Jake's gonna come right up here with me, you'll see.
In this episode, Chelsea starts a campaign to stop an old tree by the school from being cut down. She also meets a guy who is a vegetarian like her and supports her cause even more so than Raven or Eddie. But later, Raven and Eddie find out that this guy is lying about everything. Now, I love that this episode tapped into Chelsea's activism spirit, which is something we rarely get to see, especially in the later seasons of this show. Because in season 3 and season 4, they just made her out to be the dumb best friend when she is a lot more than that. Also, I love how this episode featured Raviv Ullman, who was the star of Phil of the Future. I love him, and I thought it was funny seeing him playing a douchebag character because he seems like a really nice guy in person. Overall, this episode was a hidden gem, and I love the On Top of Old Oaky song that they sang at the end of the episode.
Chelsea, let your art speak for itself.
Ray, what happened to my statue?
I broke it.
In this episode, Chelsea makes a statue of Raven, then Raven says she doesn't like it, then Raven accidentally breaks it. So in order to fix the situation, Raven disguises herself as the statue. Now this episode gave us a good best friend moment between Raven and Chelsea, which are always my favorite. And this episode was very entertaining and hilarious as usual. Also, I never knew Chelsea was quite the artist. She is so talented.
Get out!
Same way I got in.
Why do I get out?
I don't know.
You little brat. As soon as I get out, I promise you I will get you.
What's up?
Raven?
In this episode, Raven has a crush on this guy, but her neighbor, a little girl named Sierra, keeps interfering and making Raven look crazy in front of the guy she likes. Now, I really like this episode, and I love whenever Raven was trying to keep Eddie awake, it made her look even crazier in front of the guy she likes.
Dad, are we okay? To the extreme!
In this episode, Cory wants to be a member of the cool skating crew, so Raven embellishes Cory's skating skills in order to help him fit in. Now this episode gave us a great brother-sister moment between Raven and Cory, which was nice to see. Also, the scene where Raven skateboards down the long staircase was so over the top, but it kinda works.
Man, the buzz must be pretty good.
My bees! Bees? Flowers? Oh, snap!
In this episode, Raven gets sick of coming second place year after year for the best dressed student at her school. Now, I thought it was funny how Raven was complaining to the guidance counselor about how someone always comes out from right out of the blue and snatches first place away from her. Then, at the ceremony, Raven is about to win first place for best dress, then the guidance counselor comes out from right out of the blue and snatches first place away from Raven. Also, I like this episode's message about never giving up. That was a nice message.
First and foremost, Trans Infinity Farm is not even a farm. It's a factory.
Oh, that. Well, yeah, that's what farms look like nowadays. Yeah. We keep the sun out to keep the freshness in.
In this episode, the school gets a new food provider who provides nothing but processed junk food. Now, I thought this episode had a great message about healthy eating, which is a great thing to teach all of the young kids watching this show. Also, they got Mindy Sterling to guest star as the representative of this food company, which was just excellent casting. She is so good at playing like mean characters. Also, towards the end of this episode, Raven flies. Like, literally.
Oh my goodness. Dad, it's Trey. Hi. JJ. And Ricky, how you doing? Oh, I touched him. Oh, Dad, thank you for having them. and thank you for having me.
In this episode, we finally get to meet the famous boy group, Boys in Motion, when they stop by the Chill Grill. Now, this group has always been mentioned throughout the show, so I knew that if there was ever an episode about them, then it would have to be good. And it was. Also, I cracked up every time Tanya would always do the Boys in Motion dance. In the season premiere, Raven, Eddie, and Chelsea give a fellow classmate a makeover. Now, before the makeover, Raven knew that this guy liked her, but she was not into him at all. Then after the makeover, she sees how fine he is, and she wants him. But he remembered what she said before, so he moves on. Now, this episode was a great way to start a great season, and I kinda wish Raven and this guy did end up dating, even if just for a little while, and they could have been Disney's first interracial couple.
Pink? She fainted!
In this episode, Chelsea gets Raven and Eddie jobs at the local dog care center with her. Now, this is one of the very few episodes of the show that I actually have a special memory attached to. I remember watching it while visiting my cousin's house a year after I had moved across the country. And this episode represents what I love the most about That's So Raven. It was just nothing but a whole lot of fun. I also love the dog wash song that everybody sang at the end of the episode. And yeah, this episode just brings back such good memories for me.
Oh, I get it. You mean stealing. Hey, you stealing. He's stealing. Go somebody.
Okay, now we've reached the top tier. In this episode, Cory gets peer pressured into shoplifting. Now, I thought it was funny how the group of guys peer pressuring Cory consisted of Kyle Massey's real-life brother, Christopher Massey, who you guys may know as Michael from Zoe 101. But the main guy peer pressuring Cory was played by Cody Lindley, who also played Jake on Hannah Montana. So apparently he played a toxic character on 2 different shows. But overall, this was just a great episode, and I loved how Raven came to help Cory. That was like an excellent big sister moment.
My princess.
Yeah, we ain't gotta talk about this princess situation.
Yes, but first we dance.
What?
In this episode, Raven befriends an African exchange student from the fictional country of Shikobi. However, the guy accidentally mistakes Raven's kindness for being in love with him, so he plans this big African wedding. Anyways, this episode was just a fun episode and I loved it. I loved how in the beginning Raven stood up for the guy when the people were making fun of his cultural outfit.
But I can see no plausible scientific explanation for your problem.
Great. So my vision's just gonna stay jacked up? It was bad enough when they were normal.
Well, it might just be temporary, but there is an alternative. However, it's quite extreme.
In this episode, Raven's visions have been acting up, so she debates on whether or not she should have them permanently removed. Now, I loved how this episode reflected on all of Raven's past adventures. Also, this episode is the closest thing that we ever got to a proper series finale for this show, even though there's a whole nother season that comes after this episode.
I hate to say this, but I had a vision and I think I know what we have to do.
Okay, well, what is it?
We're gonna need to kiss.
We are?
Maybe you missed the part where he said he liked me.
In this episode, Raven finds out that the guy Chelsea is crushing on is also a psychic like Raven. Now, I thought this was an interesting episode because Raven hardly ever interacts with people who are psychic like her and that can understand her on that level. And I thought it was even more interesting how the guy never told anyone he was a psychic, and Raven is the first person he told. And he tells her to keep it a secret, but the secret comes in between her and Chelsea because Chelsea likes this guy and thinks if he's keeping secrets with Raven, then maybe they like each other. So yeah, I think this episode probably had the most drama out of any episode in this show. And like Kim Possible would always say, so the drama.
What's everybody screaming about?
In this episode, Victor's arch rival, Leonard Stevenson, challenges him and Raven to compete against him and his daughter in their cooking show. Now this episode was hilarious, and the best part was when Raven accidentally eats some mushrooms which she's allergic to, then she blows up, quite literally. Overall, I've always loved this episode, and it has always been one of my favorites from the entire show. First of all, what the 2005 was this episode title? Anyways, in this episode, Cory tricks Raven into throwing a party while their parents are away for the weekend. So this episode was wild. I haven't been to any parties in a while, but I don't think mechanical bulls and swimming in the bathtub are the norm. I also loved how throughout this episode, whenever her favorite song would play, Raven would just drop everything and start dancing. I also loved how her favorite song was obviously an off-brand version of Crazy in Love. Overall, this episode was just nothing but fun, and it's easily one of the most memorable episodes of the entire show.
How long are you here for?
I'm going back tonight. But my dad's gonna be coming down on business all the time, so we'll be able to see each other again.
Good, Devon, because I really missed you.
I missed you too, Ray.
In this episode, Raven has a vision that she's going to be dancing with a cute guy at the school dance, but Raven never actually gets to see his face in the vision. So Raven spends the entire episode searching for this guy, and it ends up being her ex-boyfriend Devon, who moved away during season 2. Now I thought the way this episode brought Devon back was wonderful. I also thought it was perfect how Raven and Devon were slow dancing to their song by Blue Rain towards the end of this episode.
But it's been so long since I performed.
If you sing, that'll shut me up.
Well, if you'll get it started, we'll get this joint jumping. All right.
In this episode, Raven volunteers to work at the senior center and meets a lady named Ronnie Wilcox who used to be a famous singer. Now I really like this episode because Mr. Baxter turned the Chill Grill into like an old-timey nightclub. Then Raven and Chelsea got up with Miss Wilcox and sang It Don't Mean a Thing, which is a song by Miss Wilcox's actress, Della Reese, who sadly passed away back in 2017. Rest in peace. Overall, this episode was great and a pretty strong way to end a pretty strong season.
I need you to check her bag because all your evidence is in that bag!
All right, fine. Miss
Livingston? Livingston!
Miss Livingston, would you mind?
Yes, everything is right here in her bag of evil, along with her evil knitting needle.
In this episode, Raven and Cory are left alone with their revenge-seeking babysitter. Now this episode was hilarious, and it's actually one of my go-to episodes whenever I go back and watch this show, because I just loved how this episode was like a horror movie, and people kept disappearing one by one until it was just Raven and Cory left with the babysitter. Also, the big reveal at the end was hilarious, especially when Raven walked up to the camera.
Guys, I get the top. I need you to ask her about me, though. Actually, I probably know you're already gonna call her anything, but what about Raven?
In this episode, Raven faces discrimination when she applies for a job but is not accepted because of her race. Now, this show rarely ever touches on topics as serious as this, but I'm glad it did because that's how Raven was and still is one of the few Disney shows to feature a predominantly African American cast, and they needed to teach kids about the problems that black people face. And although the A plot of this episode was pretty serious, the B plot was a lot more fun because it was about Cory learning about black history and like all the contributions that African Americans have made. And I'm actually glad that there was a happy ending to this episode, even though there's not always a happy ending in the real world.
And I love these potatoes. Can somebody pass the gravy? Did you just say the G-Wow? What, y'all don't like gravy? No! What's wrong with gravy? No! She keeps saying it, Mama. Make her stop.
Now this episode is number 1 and 2 because technically it's 2 episodes in one because it's like an hour-long special. And of course you knew this episode was going to be at the top. Not only was this the only 1-hour special of the show, it was also the most viewed episode of the entire show, and is still to this day the most viewed episode of any Disney show of all time. Actually, it's tied with Phineas and Ferb, but still. Now, if you don't know what this episode is about, Raven goes to visit her cousins who live out in the country in an attempt to fix their broken relationship. Now, this episode was iconic. First of all, Raven had to be 4, 5, 6 different people, and she still managed to have her original character, Raven Baxter, wear like 1,000 different outfits. Overall, I thought this episode was extraordinary, and it might just be the greatest episode of That's So Raven. Anyways, that's it for my video. This took a really long time to make, so please don't forget to show your appreciation by leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting down below. And please don't forget to follow me on all of my socials. The link to my Twitter and Instagram is in the description down below. Also, please let me know if you agreed with my ranking, and if you didn't, please tell me what your ranking would be. I'd love to hear it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.